Good afternoon. I'm Cami Abernathy, Dean of the Herbert Wertheim College of Engineering. Welcome to our Faculty Insights webinar series. We thank you for joining us today as we have an exciting presentation planned for you. We're thrilled to have Patrick Traynor with us to discuss finding and eliminating payment card skimmers with the Skim Reaper, a UF-generated research and now commercial innovation. Patrick is the John and Mary Lou Dasberg Preeminent Chair in Engineering and a professor in the Department of Computer and Information Science and Engineering at the University of Florida. His research focuses on the security of mobile systems with a concentration on telecommunications infrastructure and mobile devices. His research has uncovered critical vulnerabilities in cellular networks, developed techniques to find credit card skimmers that have been adopted by law enforcement, and created robust approaches to detecting and combating caller ID scams. He is also interested in internet security and the systems challenges of applied cryptography. He received a career award from the National Science Foundation in 2010, was named a Sloan Fellow in 2014, a Fellow of the Center for Financial Inclusion at Axion in 2016, and a Kavli Fellow in 2017. Professor Traynor earned his MS and PhD in Computer Science and Engineering from Penn State University in 2004 and 2008 respectively, and his BS in Computer Science from the University of Richmond in 2002. He is also a co-founder of Pindrop Security, CryptoDrop, and Skim Reaper. With that, I will hand it off to Dr. Traynor to begin the presentation and discussion. Dr. Traynor?
Cami, thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to be here with all of you today, and I'm excited to tell you a little bit about some of our research results that we're turning into commercial products. I mean, one of the big focuses that we have here at the University of Florida is getting our research out of the lab. And while it's a huge challenge, it's honestly one of the most rewarding things that we do. I'm going to be talking to you about credit card skimming, which is honestly kind of a not often covered topic in academia. And I have to admit that the way that I got to this research area is also non-traditional. So as Cami said, I have a PhD in computer science. I'm a cybersecurity expert, but my credit card gets stolen all the time. In fact, over a 3-year period, my card was stolen 6 times. And there's nothing worse, when we're able to travel than going to get on an airplane and hearing from American Express that your card just no longer works. So I got kind of concerned about this and thought, either I'm bad at my job or there's a really hard problem here that no one is looking at. And fortunately, it's the latter, I think. So we'll talk about what I did about it. But I wanted to know why this was happening to me. And so I started talking to some folks in the financial industry, and they said, Patrick, this is simple. It's Suttons Law. If you're not familiar with Suttons Law, this is named after the famous bank robber from the 1930s, Willie Sutton. And when they finally caught up to old Willie, they asked him, hey, why is it that you robbed all those banks? And Sutton's response was pretty clear. It's because that's where the money is. And so while we have all of these very sophisticated methods of making payments and our lives are increasingly digital, why do people do credit card skimming? Well, because there's an enormous amount of money to be made there. It's a relatively safe way to steal money. And quite frankly, it's pretty easy. So I wanted to dig into this problem a little bit more, but like I said, this is something that academics largely view as a solved problem. Most of you will know that if you look at your credit card in your wallet right now, you'll see a little chip on the front. It's that silver or gold thing. That thing implements a standard called EMV, and it's supposed to provide a strong cryptographic protection against skimming. The bad news is it doesn't do that. It doesn't actually work. The standard is broken. And card skimming grows year on year, both here in the US and worldwide. So we need to do something about it, and we need to understand it better. Now, this research, by the way, is a really cool partnership, not just between myself and my grad students, but with many organizations beyond the walls of the University of Florida, including the NYPD's Financial Crimes Task Force, the Secret Service, and many, many companies that I can't name directly. But understand that we went and talked to these folks. We learned about their experiences in the space, what they were doing as the state of the art in terms of defense, and then tried to provide them tools that would be easy to use and effective. So let's start off by talking about what skimmers look like and how they work. It turns out there are a couple of different types. Some you'll be familiar with and some probably not. The first type are known as overlays, and these are the ones that people generally tell you to look for. they'd make an exact copy of the fascia or some physical front piece of a card accepting unit. And they generally go over an ATM bezel, or they're used at the gas pump. Now, by the way, we often tell people, why don't you just go inside if you're worried that you're going to get skimmed at the gas pump? You'll be safe in there. And the bad news is that no, you won't. Skimmers, the overlay variety, exist really everywhere cards are taken. So this advice that you commonly hear on the news is actually fairly useless. The ones that most people are surprised about, and quite frankly, these ones scare me the most, are what are known as deep insert skimmers. And this is a custom cut piece of metal. And what you do is you slide it directly into the card reader itself, so that it can't be seen. It really can't be felt. You have no idea that it's there. There's just nothing that you can do about it. We generally see these in the space of ATMs, but they're increasingly being seen in gas pumps as well. Again, I told some of you that that little chip on your card was supposed to provide you some kind of protection. It doesn't. That standard is broken, and there are skimmers. They're called shimmers, and they attack EMV directly. And so even if you don't have a chip, all of your cards, if you do have a chip, all of your cards have a magnetic stripe on the back. So even if you think you're paying with the chip card, oftentimes a skimmer can just read the magnetic stripe in addition to the chip. So you're really not protected. This next kind, wiretap, these are fairly uncommon, but what happens is if you go into a grocery store and you see an ATM, sometimes they don't use an encrypted or cryptographically protected communication channel between that ATM and the bank. And so what happens is that you can just put this little device in between the ATM and the wall, and you can intercept all of the transmissions and grab all of the banking information. And finally, there are these devices. These are internal / gas pump skimmers. These exist inside the walls of the pump. And again, you can't know it's there. There really aren't any good defenses. But in our work, and I'll talk about a couple of different pieces today, we largely focus on the overlay and deep insert because those are by far the most common across the world. But we are doing some work now on the internal and gas pump space. Some of you might be wondering, by the way, how do they get my PIN? Because that might be necessary for a transaction. And there's some very, very clever mechanisms to do this. The first is they'll buy old PIN pads. And you can see on the left-hand side, they take an old PIN pad, they add a little bit of programmable logic to it, and they place it on top of the PIN pad that's there. The great example, or the interesting bit of this one I want you to see is that the one on top is actually more worn. So you can see where the fingerprints have been, particularly on the 2 and the 4. And they'll buy these and actually wear them down intentionally so that it doesn't look out of place. If it looks too new, someone might say, that's off. Alternatively, they can use cameras. And what you see here is this camera is actually in the skimmer itself, and it's pointing down at the keypad. And they can watch you enter your PIN. What I want to show you is that is this skimmer that I have here in my hand. And the proof that they use cameras is actually right here in the corner. And this is essentially a millimeter size hole that conceals an HD camera and watches you type in your PIN or your zip code if you're at the gas pump. When we tell people, just look for something out of the ordinary, these folks know how to make things look ordinary, whether it's by making them worn or hiding them in places where you just can't possibly see them. By the way, that also includes, we've seen cases where these folks have hidden them up in the lights above the ATM. And so you really have very little way to stop them. So what do the experts say? How can you defend yourself? And are these techniques any good? Well, in industry, particularly retail, a lot of folks are being told just use a ruler. And what you can see here are, these are 2 Ingenico units. You've probably made a transaction at a store on these. And the one on the left is very slightly wider than the one on the right. The one on the left does indeed have a skimmer on top of it. And the folks who are working at the store are supposed to go and measure it with a ruler and tell if anything is off. That's tough, of course, because folks that work retail generally have a lot to do and don't have a lot of time. So taking accurate measurements and then anticipating the measurement size of essentially all the skimmers that people are going to overlay, it's just hard. And so it is not particularly effective. You've all probably heard the advice to wiggle it, right? So you go up to the pump and you shake on it. And this is not bad advice, but from my experience working with law enforcement, these devices are generally have a strong adhesive all throughout the inside. There's approximately $1,000 worth of effort and gear in this thing. And so the attackers don't want to lose their skimmer because it fell off. So you might get lucky, but just because you pull on it and nothing falls off, they generally have to take them off with a piece of metal or a pry bar. You're not going to get it off without any real effort. You might say, Patrick, I've been at the gas station, I've seen tamper evident seals. Those work. Or you might say, I have this really cool app on my phone. It detects Bluetooth skimmers. I'm going to talk about those latter two really quickly, just to show you why they're both problematic. Here's an official security seal. You can see that "we care" is in quotes. And the first thing you should notice, this was taken on a real pump, is that this seal is broken. In fact, the void lettering is clearly visible, but this seal remains on the pump. These devices, these stickers, really don't prevent any kind of theft meaningfully. And what I mean by that is we've actually partnered with the state of Florida, with the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. We were the first external scientists to look at the data that they've been gathering. And so we looked over a 3-year period. And during that time, AG was able to find nearly 2,100 skimming devices in pumps at 953 locations. And in nearly 80% of the cases in which they found skimmers, they found that the stickers were all in place. Everything looked good. This is because stickers fall off all the time. The folks who are often running these places, if a sticker is missing, they're generally told, put a new sticker on. You can buy these stickers on the internet. There's not much that actually protects you here. By the way, if stickers sit out in the sun for too long, the glue begins to break down and they fall off. And certainly here in the Sunshine State, that's a real problem. I'm going to go on the technical side because some of you have said, hey, look, that's a nice analog solution, Patrick, but certainly there's got to be an app version that's better. And let me just show you what we did. We did some reverse engineering of all of the available Bluetooth detection apps, skimmer apps out there. And I'm showing you a little bit of code, but I'm going to show you the parts that matter here. So don't worry if you don't read code. So the first part is, this is the real logic of what's going on. This app first starts off by showing an advertisement. Then it tries to do a scan and just lists all of the Bluetooth devices it can find. And then no matter what it does, no matter what it sees, it says, no skimmer found, this scan not found, any device, use skimmer hardware, please. You can see that this is not particularly useful. The majority of these applications just sell advertising space, and the ones that do work are trivially evadable. And we know that because by partnering with law enforcement and ag, we were able to get a number of Bluetooth skimmers and show that they were either undetectable or with very minimal configuration changes could be made that way. So why don't we dig in a little bit and figure out what it is about skimmers that they need to work. And then if we know that, perhaps we can sort of do a bit of judo. And if we can counteract skimmers by detecting these things or taking advantage of these requirements, then we can actually build an effective skimmer detector. So this is a close-up picture of a skimmer just like the one that I showed you. And it shows us a couple of important things. The first is that in order to read the magnetic stripe of a credit card, you have to touch it. But the electrical field that's created on the back of these devices is such a low power that even if you're off by a millimeter, you won't read it. So what you're going to see is that if you ever look at the manuals of these devices, the legitimate card readers, that is, they tell you that you have to have a firm touch on the card. In fact, if you look at this picture here, you can see that there's a tiny spring opposite the read heads. And I can try and show you it on this one. it's just right down in here. That spring is designed to make sure that your card is pushed up into the reed heads and you get a good read. The second thing is that the surface material matters here. That material has to be conductive and conductive in a very special way in order for the read to happen. And the last thing is that the reed heads have a minimum size, and that's effectively the size of the track that the electromagnetic encoding happens on the magnetic strip. So knowing that, we were able to actually build the following device based on this hypothesis, that overlay and deep insert skimmers work by adding an additional read head. So if we can tell how many times a card is being read, and we know how many it should be read, then when we see a difference, then we can raise an alarm because there's a problem. Right now, again, this is a very, very simplified version. Happy to share the academic paper with you afterwards. Here's kind of the cool part, and part of what made being here at UF special. This is our original Skim Reaper device, and we took this, we shared it with the NYPD's Financial Crimes Task Force. They were able to actually find a hit on an ATM in Queens, then do a stakeout and make an arrest and ultimately a conviction, helped by our device. And the story behind this is really amazing and a testament to the resources here at UF. We had to build our own hardware electronics, and we didn't have a $1 billion fab. And so we were spray painting our own copper boards and then laser etching them here on campus. We didn't have a way to manufacture plastics. So we used open laboratories that allowed us to do 3D printing to prototype the big black box that you see on the left. And then we were able to take advantage of something that, again, I'm very fortunate to have. As Cami mentioned, I'm the Dasburg family professor. And the grant space here was honestly very difficult because this was risky. But using my chaired professorship, I was able to fund the purchase of these materials, to travel, to visit the NYPD so that we could try it in the field and learn from experts. The PhD student who graduated in this space, and all of these results are honestly because of the generous support by the Dasburg family. And if you're ever wondering, what when you're asked to donate to the university, what kinds of things it supports, it's efforts like this that are high risk, high reward. So we went out and we used these devices with the NYPD and a number of other folks. When they got that arrest and conviction, things got really busy for us. This was picked up by the AP, and then our device was everywhere. So from traditional print to video and news stories, we had another problem on our hands, and that was that people wanted to know how they could get one. And so we had to then take this out of the lab because the device that we had made had all sorts of problems. It was perfect for proof of concept, but we had to transition it so that folks who weren't in a lab could use it. So we had that USB cable you can see plugged in there. That cable would become unsoldered. In fact, when we were working with the NYPD, after a day's use, the cable became disconnected. We had to run and find a hardware store in Manhattan that was open late at night to find the pieces we need to essentially re-glue everything back together. The plastics were really nice for a prototype, but they were ugly and people didn't want to use the 3D printed box. It was cumbersome to carry around. We were building a device. It would take us probably 15 to 20 hours to do so. And the demand for such a tool became very high. So we took everything back to the lab. We thought long and hard about who would use this, how they would use it. And after about a year, we came up with this. And this is actually the Skim Reaper itself. Looks just like this. And it's very simple. It gives you a blue light if everything is good, and gives you a red light if there's a problem. And it comes in a nice carrying case. Now, this device, at the current time, we started making it available commercially. We filed for the intellectual property protections through the university a few years back, and the patent was awarded, I think about 6 months ago. Since that time, we're now deployed in 20 states, and we have interest from beyond the US. And the customer base is really diverse. It's just anybody who takes payments. So government, law enforcement, banks, retail, security companies, gas, public services. It's been a really amazing adventure. And again, in this short period of time that I have, I'm very much condensing this. But if you're interested in seeing more about what we've done and learning about our journey, please do check us out at skimreaper.com. So just to wrap this up, I really wanted to leave plenty of time for questions. They asked me to keep it to 20 minutes. Like payment systems, we're all told that we're going to move to these fantastic, secure mobile systems, but the truth is that credit cards are going to be with us for a very long time. And anybody who's been an engineer in a professional environment will tell you that the idea of ripping out old legacy infrastructure and replacing it tomorrow is just sort of laughable, right? The things that we built 30, 40, 50 years ago, they're going to be around for a long time, and we have to build security around the assumption that those systems are going to be there. The same thing is in payments. We're going to see certainly a spread, and it's going to become much more heterogeneous. So you'll have lots of new ways to pay, but you'll be able to pay with the magnetic stripe for a very, very long time to come. And that means we're going to have to defend it. Sometimes it's not necessarily popular in the academic space to go and look at older systems, but because those systems are going to be around forever, they are really enticing for attackers and for fraudsters to go after. What I want everyone to understand is that we're not just writing papers. It's a great part of what we do. And in fact, this work won a best paper at our top conference in information security. But we here at the University of Florida are actually taking those solutions, getting them out beyond the lab, and making sure that the people who need them and the people who are being hurt by the attackers in this space can have access to those solutions and can fight back. So with that, Cami, I'd like to turn it back to you and see if I can answer any questions.
Thanks, Patrick. That was terrific. Really, really terrific. Thank you. We have an opportunity now to ask Patrick some questions. Please put your questions in the chat feature or the Q&A box, and I'm sure Patrick will be happy. While we're waiting for others to type in, Patrick, I'll ask you a question. What was the thing that surprised you the most about trying to move a technology directly into a product?
Cami, there's so much, but one of the things that sticks with me, and I'm sure that the other engineers on the call can agree, what works in the lab doesn't always necessarily work in the field. Right? What sort of the physics in a vacuum thing, right? That we had this beautiful device, and we thought was beautiful, and we 3D printed it, and we were very proud. It had a little screen on it that gave complex instructions, and it turned out that when we gave it to people, they couldn't use it. They didn't understand it. So after the first night with the NYPD, for example, we went back to where we were staying, rewrote the user interfaces, tried to make them simpler, and watched them again. And ultimately, customers told us, "Look, give me a light that says good, give me a light that says bad. That's all I want." And it's so simple. I wouldn't have come to it myself. So that's one that really sticks with me, is get it out of the hands of the folks in the lab, watch actual people use it, and then figure out how it's supposed to be. Yeah.
Technology interaction. We've got a couple of questions now. So it looks like you've intrigued some people there. Do you plan on having a consumer version?
Yeah, so right now the device is available online. You can purchase one if you want. We're largely targeting companies, just because we are a very tiny startup, and so strategically, we have to be careful about how we deal with things like assisting users. And so certainly we do have a number of private individuals who've acquired the devices, but we're largely, until we grow, we're targeting companies across essentially all sectors.
The next one is about distribution. Do you have a channel partner program, or are you looking for organizations to resell this product service?
Yeah, we have some partners that we're starting that conversation with, and we're always interested. One of the things that getting a PhD has taught me is that I'm good at some things, and partners have expertise in other areas. And so we're always interested in talking with folks who are better at some things than we are. So please do reach out. I can put the slide back up with my contact information if you'd like, but I'm more than happy to chat.
What kind of threats are you seeing in the contactless payment space?
Yeah, really, really a very interesting question. So for those of you who aren't familiar, contactless payments kind of coming in two forms. Some of your credit cards will actually have a little wireless symbol on the back, and you can do tap payments, or you can actually do tap style payments directly from your phone. It's different than a strictly mobile payment. So what we're actually seeing the beginnings of are devices that sort of pretend to be that the correct terminal. So the thing you think you're paying, they're actually putting themselves in the way temporarily. And so they're catching some of those transactions. Now, the good thing is a lot of these contactless payments have a maximum value. I think it's $75. So the individual fraud that can be achieved through this fashion is somewhat limited. But that said, to be honest with you, what we're seeing is the biggest thing slowing down that kind of fraud is that magnetic stripe fraud is just so easy. That magnetic stripes are everywhere. That every time we hear someone say, "Oh well, we're going to get rid of magnetic stripes on credit cards," what people fail to realize is that even in Europe, where EMV has been deployed for over a decade, well over a decade at this point, all of the credit cards still have a magnetic stripe on the back. When you start to think about things like open loop gift cards or the Visa or American Express gift cards that everyone loves to get, at the holiday season, none of those have chips on them because a card with a chip costs $2, but a card with just a magnetic stripe costs you 1 to 2 cents. So this method is going to be around forever, and it's low-hanging fruit. It's really easy to attack. Great question.
Are there any efforts underway to detect the cameras that you mentioned?
Yeah, I've seen some folks talking about this. The challenge there is that if you think about it, there are cameras everywhere. There are cameras everywhere, and so even if you could reliably detect that there was a camera watching you, think about the places you would be where that would be normal. At the gas station, there's almost always a camera, and a lot of them now are connected via Bluetooth or Wi-Fi. At the ATM, there's certainly at least one camera in the ATM, if not one behind you, who's doing the same thing. Same thing in retail. So even if you can pick out a stream, which we certainly believe we could do, figuring out whether it's legitimate or not is a challenge. The other thing is, even if you can do that, oftentimes what the bad guys will do, they'll just turn the camera off. So they'll wait, they'll do something simple like they'll look for motion to start, right? They'll put a light sensor that indicates that something is passed in front of the camera, and then they'll turn it on. So based on our experience, we found that it really wasn't worth going after the cameras. The other thing, as I mentioned, even if we had an incredibly robust means of finding those cameras, they can use pin pad overlays. So they can just abandon the thing that we think we're going after and use something else. But that, by the way, that really speaks to why our solution works as well as it does. Because in order for the bad guys to do that kind of skimming, they have to do those three things we talked about. There's no substitute. If you change one out, you're not going to get regular card reads. You're not going to be able to do any kind of real skimming. And so we punish them by making them adhere to those requirements and catch them in the act.
What are your feelings about the security of the Apple Pay type model?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And in general, I support the move towards more mobile payments. The idea that you have rotating identifiers so that if somebody happened to capture the card or the account used in this transaction, it wouldn't do them any good anyway. I love that. And certainly I would appreciate if more independent evaluation of those protocols was done, but I believe them to be safer. But that said, let me kind of push back and tell you about some of the realities in the payment space. So 25% of people in the US are or underbanked. It means they either don't have a bank account or they've got one that doesn't serve them. That means that not everybody's got a smartphone that's smart enough to actually do that. A lot of folks, when they go to the gas station, don't want to lug out their phone. So while we do have more secure solutions, convincing people to stop doing what they know, forcing a culture change is really hard. So I talk to folks about what made credit cards possible. And think about the last time you went to a store and wrote a check. It's just incredibly painful, right? You get it out, you have to have a driver's license, there's all that writing involved, but a card is just a swipe or a dip. Anything that replaces that has got to be essentially as cheap as that to the user and as fast and convenient as that. So that's why I argue that the payment space is only going to get more heterogeneous. There'll be different problems when we have, if we ever have a mobile payment only environment. But yeah, that's another great question with a multi-part answer. Thank you for asking it.
What about the readers that have a lighted lock symbol? What is that telling us?
So let me make sure that I'm careful here. We in the security community sort of laugh about the lock symbol. It's one of those things that we can offer with no proof, right? So I could put a lit up lock and it means you're good, right? So there's no set of requirements that say in order to have a lit up lock, you have to do the following things. You have to have the following procedures, algorithms, defenses. So a light up lock could simply mean that there's an LED inside the device. Now, it might mean that there is an encrypted reader. It might not. What we're finding, by the way, is when they put an encrypted reader in, and that means the bad guys can't put one of those internal gas pump readers in between them. What we find is that the bad guys often come and do physical damage to those readers. So they'll hit them with a baseball bat. They'll put a lot of water inside. They'll damage them. And then the folks running the gas station will have to go and buy a cheaper version, or they'll just rip it out entirely themselves and put one in that has a lock that does nothing, still works, and they'll be able to get the information. So a lock is something that many in the security industry use to try and communicate security, but because there's no set of standards on what it means, it could literally just mean that there's an LED inside. It's a great question.
The Skim Reaper relies on law enforcement to be effective. It seems to me, this is the questioner, that if the consumer can be enabled to stop the problem, then there's a better chance of putting the skimmers out of business. How do we get the consumers active in this? And are the Skim Reapers priced for the consumer to purchase and use? I.e., is the cost of buying a Skim Reaper less expensive than getting the card hacked often?
Great questions. Great questions. So law enforcement is just the first set of folks that we talked to in this space because they're the ones that often have to deal with it. And we're the ones who were most willing to do so publicly. So when we went and tried to talk to various financial institutions, they kind of said, who are you and what are you doing? And rightfully so, they want to protect their customers. But by establishing that relationship with law enforcement first, we could then be introduced to those folks. I don't think that ultimately the solution here is law enforcement. And the reason why is because they can't be everywhere at all times. So maybe you get lucky and maybe they happen to come past your ATM. Maybe they happen to come past your retail location and happen to swipe or dip our device in that time period. Skimmers have batteries and battery life is limited. So these folks are sometimes in and out in 8 hours. If that doesn't happen to coincide with the window of check, you have a problem. Ultimately, though, that's why stores have locks, because law enforcement can't be around at all times. Ultimately, we think it's on the vendor to provide a secure experience for the people who are their customers. We really think that that's the best thing to do. Imagine as a customer, you can certainly go and find one, but then what procedures should the company follow if you happen to find it? It's often not well spelled out. If companies have procedures in place, if their employees are checking regularly, then they know, okay, we're going to involve law enforcement. We're going to take the following steps. We'll shut down that ATM. It's best managed, in our belief, by the folks who are taking the payments themselves. So we can talk pricing. Right now, again, we're a small startup and we're working mostly with businesses directly, and so we're priced much more for those folks. But we're also selling a precision device that's custom manufactured. And by the way, the device is manufactured in Houston. So everything from ideation to manufacture happens here in the United States. When you wonder, where your tax dollars go, projects like this can create jobs in the United States, and we do that, and we take it very, very seriously. So, but we're certainly willing to chat. Please do reach out if you have more questions about that. But the pricing right now on the website is there, and certainly targeting more towards businesses.
What resources are there through the UF alumni programs to get some traction for a technology startup should there be mutual research interest from the university that is potentially applicable to other industries?
That's a great question, and I'll answer it to my capacity, but if someone else on the call can't provide more information from the university side, please follow up. I can connect you with folks like Eric Sander who can definitely do this. So the best way is if you're looking for a partnership with a researcher, there's a research question, you might be looking at what's known as the SBIR or STTR programs. Now these programs are grant programs offered by the federal government, and virtually every federal agency has to allocate 2% of their budget to this money being given out. And the idea is that it's to take something that's past the ideation phase, but might be in advanced prototyping, and that you're trying to turn into a business. National Science Foundation, Department of Homeland Security, DARPA, everyone has an SBIR or STTR program. And so I highly recommend that you look at those. Cami, I'm not sure if you're comfortable speaking about what the university can offer to alums in terms of support.
Yeah, typically it would be through entrepreneurship programs. We have training programs to help people understand the industry, the funding mechanisms. Again, Eric Sander, I think, would be a great person to talk to if you're looking for. And there's also opportunities to take university research and turn it into a startup, and that would be done through the Office of Technology and Licensing. So very similar to the advice you gave Patrick.
Yeah.
So there are a couple of questions here about how you're going to stay ahead of the bad guys. This one says, have you seen the threat landscape change somewhat since the introduction of the Skim Reaper? Curious to see how malicious actors have adapted if they begun to do so. The same follow-on question, how do you prevent the skimmers from again attacking your Skim Reaper and working around it?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a great question. It's actually something that we spend a lot of time on behind the scenes. So I won't reveal all of the things, but we had some offender interviews, and we talked to folks, and we kind of asked them what they thought they might do. We also, put on our black hats and tried to attack the device. The nice thing is, because the way it works is so built into the requirements of doing that kind of skimming, it makes it very hard to counter it. So for example, if you said, well, I'm going to pull the read head slightly off, well, then you're not going to get reads. And so you all of a sudden make yourself a lot less profitable. Ultimately, a lot of these problems are economic in nature. So we can make this a lot more expensive, that the cash out potential for one of these devices drops to near or below the cost of making one, and then the risk of deploying it. We're doing a great job. But that said, we haven't seen that much of a change. We saw one or two devices that are in gas pumps that moved away from Bluetooth entirely. They put cellular radios on. And again, the ones inside the internal and the gas pump, we don't detect. We have something that, speaking of the Office of Technology Licensing, Cami, we just sent a provisional patent on, I think it went out yesterday, actually. To the PTO. So we are working in that space to bring other solutions to slightly different kinds of skimmers. But there are so many places that take magnetic stripe payment. Honestly, if you happen to put your sticker in our sticker in your window, the bad guys take it down the street to the folks who aren't doing it yet.
This is sort of a related question. What are the percentage of Skim type devices compared to internal type devices? If the device is internal, the bad guy has to retrieve the data somehow, I'm guessing by Wi-Fi or Bluetooth. Are you considering incorporating that to make a more robust protection solution?
Great question. And the answer to that is the kind of skimmer, really depends often on the area of the country, to be honest with you. So in New York City, in most cities, the overwhelming number of skimmers are of the overlay or deep inserts. Florida, actually, because so much of the state is rural, More of them are of the nature of the internal gas pump ones. But if you go to a place like Miami or Orlando, places that are very popular with tourists, you find these overlay and deep insert style devices. They're everywhere that people are. The ones that go inside the pumps can sit for a lot longer. They take power from the pump itself. So the likelihood that over the course of 2 months, they'll get a large number of cards is high kind of no matter where you are. So it really depends on knowing something about your area, knowing something about the population, the kinds of crime that happen. Now, again, do we have Wi-Fi and Bluetooth detectors? We actually did some work, and I kind of hinted to it, but what we showed was that there certainly are apps and tools out there that do this. It's really incredibly easy to evade. And here's one where you could spend a lot as an entrepreneur to build a device, and all the bad guys have to do is turn off Bluetooth and only turn it on, at the top of the hour, and we'd miss it.
Mm-hmm.
So we actually don't think there's a good way to do this. The other thing we saw was that in the case of Bluetooth, folks have actually turned to cellular radios. And the idea there is they plug it in on the inside of the gas pump, and they leave it there. And every time a card is put in, they get a text message with the credit card information. They never come back. So we certainly looked at detecting the various networks that were possibly being used. And it turns out that they just changed the network. And so it's not very robust.
Talk a little bit about alumni who want to get involved in entrepreneurship. What advice would you give students who are looking to transfer their research into practice with a small business?
Well, the first thing I have to tell you is that being at UF is honestly a huge leg up when you're doing this, because the Alumni Association is one of the largest, one of the best on the planet. And so you already have a leg up. The fact that we have so many people here today tells you that people are interested in helping you and learning more and in deploying the future, not just inventing it. So congratulations, you've already done one of the harder things. So the next part is, again, working with the Office of Technology Licensing, working with researchers like myself. Maybe you have an idea that you need help protecting the intellectual property. Maybe you have an idea, but there's a core research piece that you're not sure about. Maybe you see some of the patents that we've been working on and go, wow, that's great. I bet those guys can't build a commercial version, but I can. We in the security group, just in the last 6 months, I've been awarded 3 patents, and we've filed for 4 more. I mean, we're producing patents in spaces as diverse as detecting ransomware, as doing caller ID protection to try and detect and get rid of robocalls. I mean, if any of these things are problems that you deal with, and they almost certainly are, come and talk to us. And if we're not the right people, then we can certainly get you involved. We mentioned earlier, Eric Sander here at UF helps run the entrepreneurship program and get folks the business training or the engineering training, and are matched with folks who can help them with those things. So,
are you aware of any association that provides guidance or procedures for the industries that accept credit cards?
So the standard here is something that's known as PCI DSS. This is standard protections. It tries to prevent companies from doing things like storing your credit card numbers long term. There are a number of PCI DSS consultancy firms that will send in folks who can talk to you to make sure that you're in compliance. And but even companies that are totally compliant, the nature of this payment technology is that it can be stolen, intercepted, copied, and used against you pretty quickly. So yes, PCI DSS is exists, and every company that I know of that takes credit cards attempts to be compliant, but in this case, it doesn't really protect you.
You could start all over with a replacement for the credit card. What would it be?
Well,
Go back in time.
As you mentioned, my primary area of research is mobile phones, cellular infrastructure, and securing those things. I love mobile payments. In particular, we've seen mobile payments in places like the developing world just blow up and make it so that people who weren't able to have bank accounts in the past can now have something independent of banks and pay each other digitally. I had the great pleasure to travel with the State Department and visit Kenya, Tanzania, the Congo, and talk to folks there who are delivering the next line of payment systems to folks in these countries. And it's really amazing. By using text messaging there, they're able to effectively create a middle class. Folks who used to have to get on buses and physically carry currency back home to their family outside the cities don't have to risk literal highway robbery anymore. They can text each other. It's really tremendous. We don't have anything quite like that here in the US. Without mentioning any products, we have a couple of things that are getting close, but ultimately they rely on you having a traditional bank account, a traditional credit card. And so, to be honest, the developing world has some more interesting and better for peer-to-peer payment mechanisms than we do. I would love if we could do that. Now, the text messaging based payments has all kinds of security concerns, and we've worked with those providers. We've worked with the ITU and various stakeholders across the planet to try and improve that. But ultimately, when we come back to the US, if we're going to use a smartphone centric approach to payments, we have to remember that 25% of the population is not going to have that smartphone, is not going to have that bank account, and won't be able to participate. I can't imagine any retailer, anyone saying, I'm not interested in having business from 25% of the population. So we need to make sure that whatever it is that we dream up, there's a possibility of inclusion across all socioeconomic statuses. Yeah, great question.
There's a growing digital divide in the country, and so
yeah,
managing that's going to be important for the adoption of technology in the future.
Absolutely. But back to the original question, if I could go back and do it all again, some sort of mobile payment, something that was possible with really the most basic cell phone, and then of course not pretending that it was the only system out there, to make sure that people could still pay in cash or gift cards or a number of other ways. But and ultimately, I do see the industry moving that way. It's just going to be very, very slow. Think about the last time you went to the gas pump. Paying with your credit card is it's easy. So,
you talked about perpetrators getting access to the cards with chips on them as well. Does your Skim Reaper test for those kinds of?
Yeah. So on certain readers, we can use our device to do tests, and I can talk to folks if they're interested in the specific details. Right now, those kinds of readers are the EMV attacks are much more rare because magnetic stripes are still everywhere. And so as a startup, we had to make a choice. Do we go after the sort of the next generation, which isn't very common, or do we go after the thing that's plaguing everybody? And so we can use our device in some limited ways to find them. And we have some ideas on how to actually do it robustly as we go forward and continue to grow. But we're 4 people so far, and so we have a ways to go.
Oh, a long ways with 4 people. That's amazing.
Yeah, we're really excited. And again, it's really amazing to get something out there that we know is making a difference.
Are there any common characteristics of the perpetrators of these crimes?
No, it's actually sort of a very democratic process. So some folks build their own skimmers, and they have enough training with microelectronics. They can build them. But if that's not you, if you don't have the educational background, you can go online and just purchase them. So you could be very technical, or not. And certainly in our work with law enforcement, we see a range of folks who are involved. Yeah.
So sort of a related question. Do you think the majority of the skimmers are homemade, or do you think they're purchased?
It's hard to say. Actually, one of the kind of, I don't want to say the word fun, but interesting stories we had in working with the Department of Agriculture. They often go out, they're checking the pumps, the insides. And of course, they don't have, just like law enforcement, they don't have enough personnel to be everywhere at all times. But they'll go out and on those devices, they'll have numbers written. And so the people who deploy them will say, okay, this is number 5. And then, so they'll find number 5, and then they'll find number 17. And then they'll wonder, well, where's 1 through 4 and 6 through 16? the Department of Agriculture last year estimated that they were catching perhaps 5% of the skimmers that were out there. And so I wish I could tell you. All I know is that based on the folks who are out in the trenches pulling these things out of there, and they do a heck of a job, there are a lot. There are a lot.
So this question is about what is the industry doing to get rid of magnetic strip credit cards? Is there a plan to phase these out, or is it just so ingrained that they can't get rid of them?
Well, so there are plans, but they are so ingrained. So I ask you to think of sort of two things. The first is that some of you have probably seen that there's this liability shift. And so Visa and MasterCard have said after, I think it was 2014 or 15, that within stores, that if you don't switch over to EMV, that they'll no longer be liable for fraudulent transaction. Okay, but if you go into a store, I mean, I know this has happened to most of you. You put the chip card reader in, the card in the reader, and it says, I can't read that. And you try one or two more times, and it says, you know what, just swipe it. Magnetic stripe is the fallback. And so sometimes we see the bad guys, they'll put a piece of paper in the slot that says slot broken, please slide card, or they'll short out the reader. And so again, you can have requirements that look great on paper, but when it's easy to go to the fallback. Mm-hmm. So, and quite frankly, we've all experienced the chip card not working. And so until we have something that's as reliable as the magnetic stripe, it won't go away entirely. The other is the gas, the fuel services industry. The card companies have said, okay, they're the last ones. They need to upgrade, and the liability shift will happen. It was supposed to happen this year. Some say it was because of COVID, but honestly, it's a huge problem in the industry. Take a look at the gas pump you're at next time and realize that it's a massive embedded system, and that you can't just rip out components and plop in new ones and pretend it all plays well. And then understand that even if you could do that you have to get a state inspector in then to certify that the new pump is safe. And so it might cost you upwards of $20,000 to replace a single pump. And then you have to ask yourself as a retailer, what's the return on investment for me? Mm-hmm. Right? If I have to deal with a couple of $100s of fraud a year versus $20,000 in replacing a single pump, let alone 6 or 8 or 12, why would I spend that money? So yes, there are efforts to change, but there are practical realities, the costs of changing deployed infrastructure that make this very hard.
It actually sort of addresses the next question in the queue. Since the banks and customers are ultimately paying for the fraud and not the vendors hosting the devices being skimmed, what is the motivation for vendors to spend the money fixing the problem? And that's what you just touched on. There really isn't.
Well, I mean, there are a few. So again, in cases where liability is shifted, the vendor might. But I'll tell you, no vendor wants to be known as the one where people get skimmed. Mm-hmm. And there have been, without naming names, there are places in Gainesville that I don't shop anymore because I know that I've been skimmed there. And so,
okay, Patrick, let's talk after this is over. I need you to tell me which of those places are. So.
You want to know where I buy my gas, right?
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to follow you to the pump next time.
That's right. That's right. Listen, a couple of $100 at the end of the day for a company may not be a deal breaker, but losing a customer and then that customer telling their friends, the reputation damage is huge. On top of that, we actually see in Florida, what these folks often do is they then come back to gas stations. They will fill up waterbed liners, so big bladders, and they'll fill them up with diesel fuel. Then they'll sell that diesel fuel at construction sites, or sometimes they'll export it to embargoed nations, including Cuba and Venezuela. And so if that company doesn't fix the skimming problem on the first side, and they're somehow indemnified by the bank, well, they're going to lose the money in lost gas, lost inventory. So being the place that people get skimmed is not something that anybody wants. And you do have a real risk of loss, depending on your industry.
Patrick, there have been a lot of very complimentary things said about you in the the Q&A in the chat section, and a number of requests to put your contact information back on the screen. So could you put that slide back up? I think a lot of people want to get your website.
Yes, of course.
Your contact information.
Let's just hit play here. So again, please, if you're, I try to split my duties here. My day job, I'm very, very fortunate to be the Dasberg professor at the University of Florida. And so please, traynor@ufl.edu. If you want to know more about Skimmers, please contact me at traynor@skimreaper.com. Again, I can't tell you what an exciting time it is to be at UF and to be able to take something from the lab, bring it out into the world and make a difference. And, it's great to be a Florida Gator. What can I say?
Patrick, thank you so much. This was terrific. I look forward to hosting more of these in the future. Thanks to all of our alums who tuned in today to watch. I think you got a good look at some of the great work that's going on at the University of Florida. We're very fortunate to have Patrick and his colleagues here, and it's really exciting to see that the university is making a difference in people's lives. And it's really great to be a Florida Gator, as Patrick said. Thank you again for joining us today, and go Gators.